My name is Timmy Gerson. I'm the Vice President and Chief Content Officer at NCRP, National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. We are really glad that you folks are with us today. We're very thankful to the co-sponsors, Funders for Reproductive Equity, Women's Funding Network, and the United Philanthropy Forum, as well as the local leaders who are going to be talking to us today about what's happening in Texas, what they need from philanthropy, how philanthropy can step up to meet this moment that's been such a long time in the making, and also to hear from some funder allies about what they have been doing and are going to be doing. For NCRP, we're doing work around reproductive access as part of our movement investment project. And, you know, the reason we're doing that is because we know that abortion access is inexorably intertwined with racial justice. The vast majority of folks who are seeking abortions are Black, Latinx, Asian, and Pacific Islander. We know it's inexorably tied to economic justice. About 3/4 of folks seeking abortion are low income. So we understand this issue to be at the nexus of many of the social justice issues that determine how people are able to live their lives and how our communities are able to survive and thrive. So we're here as we see it because of a crisis on two fronts. Obviously, what just happened in Texas was, right, the end of a long road of kind of having a Roe in name, but not in actuality for many people. And we think this is obviously not just a Texas issue, but this is national. And I know the folks will talk to us about what are the national implications for what's happened. And we think there's a crisis in philanthropy from the silence that the Texas law was greeted by. We were pretty disappointed to see that there wasn't much reaction from the philanthropic sector that we could ascertain, publicly at least, to what's pretty earth-shattering and pivotal moment in this fight. And so we are heartened by the fact that over 100 funders RSVP'd for this, that our co-sponsors are in it with us, and that all of us are here to really listen to folks on the ground, tell us what they need, and listen to other funders who are allies to the movement to talk about what they're doing. So that's why we're here, and I won't talk longer than that. I want my colleague Ben Barge to give us some housekeeping and logistics notes for the call, and then we're going to hand it over to Brandy Collins-Calhoun, who leads our reproductive access work here at NCRP. So Ben?
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Barge, pronounced he, him. I'm the field director here at NCRP. And I just want to give you a few logistics about today's call. So first, as you noticed, we are recording. There were some folks who could not join today, so we will be sharing a lightly edited version of this recording with some folks who could not attend after the call. If you also have questions today, we encourage you to use the chat feature. There will be a Q&A portion later in the call. In the meantime, if you have technical issues that you're running into, you can just message me directly, privately. I'm the NCRP webinars participant. Another quick thing, if you look at the top left of most of your Zoom platforms, you should see a red button. If you click on it, you'll be able to access a transcript from Otter AI, a live transcript. So if you're someone who likes looking at captions when you watch TV, this is another way to follow along. I also encourage you, if you haven't already, to edit your participant name to include your name, your organization, your pronouns, so folks can see who else is on the call. And last but not least, to ensure everyone's safety on the call, if we see activity that looks like intentional disruption or trolling, that person will be removed. Given the precautions we've taken, we don't expect that today, but we always like to be prepared. And if you see something before I do, because I will be keeping an eye, again, just drop something in the chat and I will take action. So thanks again for being here today, and I will hand things back to Timmy and Brandy.
Peace, everyone. My name is Brandy Collins Calhoun. I am the Senior Movement Engagement Associate with NCRP, and my pronouns are she, her. I apologize for my camera not working today, but please appreciate my headshot that I will be using instead. I'm really, really excited to see the amount of folks that are able to be present on this call. A little context of how we got here, and by we, I mean NCRP. When I joined the staff a little over a year ago, there were a lot of conversations happening over what was missing in philanthropy, what conversations weren't necessarily being had, especially in regards to gender justice and reproductive justice. And as somebody who comes from frontline organizing and RJ and reproductive justice spaces, I know that abortion is something that oftentimes has a certain assumption tied to it in regards to funding and how organizations and folks leading this work are able to survive and thrive. What we realized very early on in the conversations that we were having with the folks on the front lines, the state and local level folks, the providers, the abortion funds, the abortion doulas, was that a lot of the thoughts and concerns that I had were being confirmed. There was not too much funding going to the folks holding this work on the front lines. And we started having conversations with folks, particularly in Texas very early on, the abortion funds, the providers, about what their experiences with philanthropy had been. We've done this through different surveys. We've done a good amount, if not too much, research in regards to what this actually looks like. And time again, it seems that, like a lot of issues, there's gaps. And a lot of those views, there's gaps. And a lot of those gaps are created due to the systems at hand and the ways that they have been designed. And some of it is in existence because of philanthropy. And what we've been working really hard on at NCRP is identifying what those gaps are and the best ways to support our philanthropic counterparts in really addressing the disparities, not just in regards to who's accessing abortion, but who's actually holding that work too. Because so often what we were seeing, and it's even shown in the data, that the top 20 organizations that are receiving funding to hold this work are national organizations. And that adheres even in the state of Texas. So we started having these conversations. There's a good amount of folks on this call that I've had the pleasure of speaking to about how they're funding this work and the ways that they want to invest in this work. But we were still seeing gaps through the year. We released the COVID fact sheet to have a deeper conversation around the ways that COVID had impacted abortion access, very much so to put on display that a world without Roe has already been here. And actually within that fact sheet, Texas was named because they had been hit really hard in the beginning with COVID and the ways that they were able to administer abortion and access it. So we continue to have conversations. And the things we were hearing was that they don't have access to program officers. Folks aren't funding this work at the local and state level, which we had, found in our research. That folks were having a hard time having the conversations with funders because funders weren't even publicly saying abortion. So it was hard to gauge who was interested in holding that work. And I think, unfortunately, as Timmy named, a lot of that was confirmed and affirmed with the silence that was very loud last week. So what NCRP wanted to do was make sure that there was a space where funders could hear what's actually happening on the front lines and the best ways that they could tap in to support that, but also have a very intentional conversation around this is not the end. And this is not something that is central to Texas. This is something that is going to happen in most people's backyards over the next few months from the ways that things are happening and things are looking. So there's a conversation not only of what this looks like to fund abortion and access where you live, but it's also a conversation of what it looks like to fund and support abortion if and when the inevitable happens, which is the overturn of Roe v. Wade. So this is also a conversation for philanthropy to prepare to be creative and start planning around what that will actually look like to invest in essentially illegal services. And we're gonna hear a lot from the folks on the ground, and I really wanna thank them and also the other folks from the front lines who have joined the call. I know that sitting in front of philanthropy as the folks in front of the work is never an easy task. And I thank you all. And I appreciate you all for extending grace and being willing to speak to the sector. So I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie, who will be moderating this amazing conversation.
Before we do that, do you want to run the poll, Ben, just to get us a quick take of who's on this call with us today? I think Ben will be doing the poll through the Zoom poll feature. Is that right?
That's right. Sorry, I live next to a fire station, so apologies for the background noise. I'm going to launch the poll in just a moment. So you should be able to see some of the results. For people who said they moved new flexible money directly to grassroots abortion access providers and organizers in Texas and beyond, about a quarter said yes, a little over a third said no, and about 40% said they were working on it. For whether folks who are grant makers and donors have opened up or reinterpreted their grant portfolios to recognize the intersectionality of reproductive justice, 2/3 have said yes, that's a great response. About 14% have said no, another fifth are working on it. And then finally, a little over half have said they've taken public, proud stands in support of abortion access, which is something the movement has been asking for years. 30% said no, and 14% said working on it. So our hope for today is for folks who said they were working on it, you will have more tools, more ammunition to bring that back to institutions and take that action. And for those who have said that they haven't yet, this is an opportunity to really learn more and take action. So I will stop sharing the polls and hand things back to Mindy. And I'll echo Timmy, folks should feel free to add additional things in the chat about things that you're doing, things that you want to do. We encourage that. Thanks.
Cool, great. Thank you for answering that poll. So it's great to see everyone here today. My name is Stephanie Pang, and I am the Senior Associate for Movement Research at NCRP, which essentially means that I am behind a lot of the research and the data that has gone into our resources and our content, which helps Brandy do a better job of speaking to funders and speaking to frontline organizations and making the case for more funding. Today, I'll be joined in conversation by 3 people. 2 people are from the front lines, Ghazaleh, who is a clinic provider on the front lines. The second is Rosann, who is with Jane's Due Process. And the third is Elise, who is from Tara Health Foundation. So really quickly, I just wanted to give each person a brief couple of sentences to introduce themselves and just say 1 or 2 sentences about their work. Ghazaleh, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everyone. Very honored to be here today and only slightly nervous. My name is Moayedi, Ghazaleh Moayedi. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an OBGYN, an abortion provider. I live here in Texas. And I have been working in abortion care and funding here in Texas for about 17 years.
I'm happy to go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosann Mariappuram. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Jane's Due Process and also live in Texas. Jane's Due Process helps anyone under 18 access abortion and contraception in Texas because we have parental consent requirements for both.
Hi, everyone. Elise Belusa. I use she or they pronouns, and I am the Director of Programs and Operations at the Tara Health Foundation, and we have been giving in abortion-related work in the U.S. for the past, I think, 7 years or so, but here to just share a little bit about what we've done in this moment.
Great, thank you. We're so thrilled that you all have given your time to be with us today and really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. So the first thing, I really just wanted to lay the ground, right? What has been going on the ground and what have you been experiencing over the past few weeks and really over the past few months, because this has been such a long time in the making. Ghazaleh, why don't we start with you?
We have been preparing and sounding the alarm about just politics in general in Texas for quite a while. I think if you talk to any abortion activist or provider in Texas, we would say that the writing has been on the wall for quite a while. We have a strong coalition here of providers and funds and policy folks that was really born out of our omnibus abortion bills in 20. And so, we have been working hard against this specific bill, but many other harmful bills that were introduced into the legislative session this year. And the past few months has been really nonstop in trying to care for folks, get as many folks taken care of as possible while simultaneously building out new infrastructures to get people care. And while simultaneously trying to figure out how to combat this law from multiple angles. So I don't think tired is the right word. There's some other word that hasn't been made yet, but that's the word.
I can dive in from there. And I want to say I'm also nervous to be on this call, but I also feel strength because I see a lot of other Texas folks. And I'm thankful to have the opportunity to lift up not just Jane's Due Process's work, but a lot of the abortion funds that are having the immediate response. So it's been hard because, in some ways, I think for the national perspective, it seems like this happened overnight. But like God said, we've been fighting this for months and ringing the alarm and begging funders and national press and people to see what was about to happen here. I think the overnight piece was really for our clients. Jane's Due Process helps minors, and so they have to go and speak to a judge and get a judicial bypass before they can consent to their abortion care, which inherently creates delay. So the 6-week ban for our clients is in many ways a full abortion ban because they are not able to get a bypass and then abortion care before 6 weeks. So we had clients who had a bypass order that came in on the 31st of August and then now cannot get abortions in Texas because of the 6-week ban. We also saw a huge increase in requests for emergency contraceptives and pregnancy tests because people are so afraid and they're doing everything they can to figure out how pregnant they are as soon as possible. A lot of our abortion funds are spending what they would normally spend in 1 month in a week because the need is so high. And practical support funding, which is travel, so getting a rental car, covering a hotel stay, the need for that has exponentially expanded, and yet there's only a handful of funds who are doing that work, and now we're all trying to meet that need and do what we can. So it has been, I'm going to say terrifying just because that's the real word for me, and I'm glad we're here to talk to y'all about it because if it's happening in Texas, it's going to happen soon in other states.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing both of a little bit of what you've been seeing. Obviously, as we've seen this law unfold, we've seen a lot of individual donors, a lot of attention on Texas and donations to Texas funds. But what we're really here is to say that philanthropy hasn't, a lot of philanthropy at least hasn't seen the urgency of the movement until recently, right? Recently we put out a statement, included a data point that from 2014 to 2018, roughly 24 million or only 2% of the foundation funding that goes for reproductive rights issues around the country goes to Texas, which is really surprising given the stronghold that Texas and so much of the work that happens in Texas. So what would you really say, Ghazaleh and Rosann, about the philanthropic funding that you have received, and what would you really want philanthropy to know?
Want me to first? So, I mean, in some ways, Jane's Due Process is considered a large abortion fund, and we have 5 full-time staff for a statewide organization that serves thousands of teenagers every year. So I think in some ways, every organization, individual I know in Texas who does abortion work is making a lot, like a little stretch tremendously far. So many of our abortion funds are still at maybe one staff member or entirely volunteer. And so in some ways, I do feel like there hasn't been a commitment to funding in Texas, and specifically to funding abortion funds and practical support organizations. And yet the work is continuing and the work is happening. I do have a lot of gratitude to those who do fund in Texas, especially Texas Family Foundations. Our organization has survived for a long time off smaller grants, and only in the past 1 to 2 years, I would say, has really received larger national attention. And I think the reason that that might be is because we finally have staff and we finally have the ability to even like be on the radar of some of those orgs. So I think scaling up has been really hard in terms of funding.
And I'll just say that, you know, my work happens at the intersection of a lot of places where funding happens. So I'm a physician, which means I also teach and educate up and coming physicians. And so much of that work in Texas, because abortion providers are rarely hired by academic institutions, is done volunteer. So the same that Rosann is talking about, that so much of even what we would consider paid work in our state is volunteer. And so many of our physicians that train the next generation to make sure we have providers in our state and to combat stigma and shame is all done, you know, after I put my kid to bed, on my day off from doing clinic. We provide abortion care for free often as well, not within our clinics, but for example, when we have very complex patients that need to go to the hospital, in those very few instances that they can go, many providers that I work with across the state go to the hospital and actually provide that care for free. And that's on top of the full-time jobs that we already have. Much of funding comes to clinics, which is great. It helps our clinics battle regulatory compliance issues, keep our staff employed in emergency situations like in COVID and like right now, get new equipment to comply with new regulatory issues. All of these things are crucial to keeping our clinics open. But there has yet to be significant funding and really investing in our physician workforce and developing our physician workforce deeply in the state. And what I mean by that is more than just physicians that fly in to provide abortion care, but physicians that work here, are invested in the community, train other physicians, work alongside other physicians, and work every day in their existence here to combat stigma and expand abortion access. So there's a lot of room. The other thing, you know, is that the physician workforce in our state and in many other restrictive states is very vulnerable. Most of us are 1099 employees. We're not employed. So our jobs are actually very vulnerable to changes in laws, COVID shutdowns, weather issues, right? We don't have workplace protections like other physicians do. We take actually significant pay cuts to work in restrictive states, and we lose on other benefits that colleagues like us might have. We do this because of the passion for our work, but then we add on a crisis like this, where we're looking at potentially our clinics being closed for 6 months, a year, 2 years. What will happen on the other end is very frightening, and who will be left to take care of people is also very frightening.
Yeah, and I think that what Rosann and Ghazaleh are speaking to are happening in Texas at this very moment, but will very easily spread to other states that are looking to pass similar laws in as soon as the next month. So bringing this perspective out a little bit, I want to ask Elise, our funder on the call, just a little bit of what they've been seeing, right, from the funders' perspective and how they've been supporting abortion access.
All right, I will do my best to give a very short and succinct recap on what we've been doing at Tower Health, which is just a small contribution, hopefully, to what's going on in Texas and around the country, but something, hopefully. So I think, in terms of what we've been seeing from our perspective, I just echo what my colleagues here have already mentioned, that that's where the work is happening. We and I have tried very much at Tara Health just to listen, knowing that this was going to happen. I have to say I was heartened by the response from funders to get together and have conversation in July and August in preparation for this. And I felt like there was a lot, at least in the repro funder community, there were a lot of folks who got together. And I will shout out to Anna DeFreitas from the SIP project, that she really helped hold a conversation of funders to educate us on what was happening and to share very transparently the organizations who are really leading this work in Texas. And, definitely highlighted, the legal needs, but more clearly the tables where the abortion funds and the practical support funds were sitting, and the support that they needed to help really get the people that we're talking about, the people who are having abortions, to get them what they need as being the real center and focus of this work. So with that in mind, and thanks to, the support from other colleagues, including Alicia Harris from the Grow Foundation, and Erica and Garen, who lead Patient Forward, as well as the Apiary Collective and Bridget Alliance, they were key in helping educate us on, who and what needed our funding, like now, before things went into effect. So in August, we decided to move our entire reproductive health portfolio, which wasn't a huge amount, but it was around $700,000, quickly to primarily abortion funds. And in our foundation, we have a priority and a requirement that 80 to 100% of our dollars go to Black, Indigenous, and people of color led and serving organizations. So it's the leadership that's important, but also more importantly, how the organization itself practices anti-racist principles, as well as who they're serving. And so we gave to a number of abortion funds, but also practical support funds who provided specific funding for people to actually get to their abortions, which is a huge barrier for a lot of folks in Texas, but also around Texas, because what we had learned is that COVID, with no surprise to probably a lot of folks on the ground, has really delayed people's ability to get care across the country. And so the increase in people seeking abortion later in pregnancy, so in their second and third trimester, has really increased. Those abortions are obviously super expensive. So we've been funding funds around those specific clinics, especially later providers in Colorado, the DC area, and New Mexico. And New Mexico obviously was going to be hit really hard by this. So we gave most of the money there, and to a fund called Mariappuram, which is also serving undocumented folks. And let's see, we recognize that the abortion providers also need significant funding at this time, but we're a relatively small foundation, and Repro, we give away about $1 million to $1.5 million each year. So we felt that the ask was pretty high, and from the coordination with funders, that there was a significant amount of resources coming in for that, although never enough. So we have been supporting Abortion Care Network as a membership organization of providers to help shore them up in their technical assistance and direct support, but recognize that there's a huge gap. But I will say that Resources for Abortion Delivery is doing a great job of helping, meet the financial and technical needs of providers in Texas and across the country. And we've given to them in the past, and I know other funders have as well. Yes, and then the last piece, and then I'll promise I'll stop talking, is our corporate engagement work that Jen Stark, who's on my team, has led. And I think there's a call tomorrow for funders if you're interested, but there's been a lot of interest in helping keep corporations and companies in Texas accountable who have stood out in the past around gender and racial equity specifically, and their principles to actually get behind that with making some change given this law. And I think there's been some response, more to come hopefully on that, but it's been interesting, and we've been excited to be a part of trying to galvanize some of that from our position. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much. So I think what we've heard from Ghazaleh and Rosann and Elise is really the importance of funding clinics and funding funds, right? The small, the state, the local organizations that are on the front lines of all of these services. And I see that there's also some chat in the chat section about this as well. I want to highlight a couple more stats. One came from our most recent release of the roadmap, which is that since 2015, 127 independent clinics, or 27% of all clinics, have ceased operations in 2019 to 2020 alone. 41 independent clinics have closed in the United States, and the majority of those 76 provided care after the first trimester, right? So we heard that second and third trimester are the most important and often the most critical. Similarly, I think looking at a philanthropic side, abortion funds are often the least funded by philanthropy and have the least attention, and are working on filling thousands of people's needs with often very little staff, as Rosann just highlighted, and mostly volunteers. So that we saw that from 2014 to 2018, less than $1 million went to Texas abortion clinics, and that's in those entire 5 years. So clearly there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of opportunity for philanthropy to really start in this space and to start funding locally. So I want to close this out by asking first Ghazaleh and Rosann, what do you want to see from philanthropy right now?
Do you want me to start, or would you like to go? So I think one big need right now is, unrestricted multi-year funding, because our future is so unclear. I want to thank some of the funders on this call who fronted funds for the year ahead. I think they knew that we were facing sort of an unknown, but it's still, the need has just quadrupled and beyond that for so many of our organizations. And so unrestricted funding allows us to do both the direct service work that we're doing. And then I also want to name that, I know abortion funds, you think of us when it comes to funding, we were also the groups that were in the state legislature fighting this bill in the middle of COVID, sleeping on the floor. So I think when you hear abortion funds, you might just think the direct service piece, but we're also the advocates, we're the abortion storytellers, and we are the pipeline of the people most impacted being centered in the policy fights, in the press. And so when you give multi-year unrestricted funding to grassroots or to abortion funds, you really are investing in real policy change on the local and state level. And I know that is maybe why sometimes there is such a focus on national funding, is the thought is to change the policy, the thought is to change it through litigation, but we are the fight. The fight is in the states and the fight is in the state houses, and that's where we are.
100%, all of that. From the clinic side, our clinics definitely need, let me back up. There is this dual desire to get people out of state and get them the care they need. And I hear in the chat people wondering about funding states around us and how we build that infrastructure. But I want to caution that it is not sustainable to move everyone from Texas that needs an abortion out of our state for the next 2 years. We can't do it. My community members are going to die. We can't do that. That has to be the plan Z, right? We need this law overturned, and we have to stop it from happening in other states. For that, we need bold funding from funders who are not afraid to fund civil disobedience, who are not afraid to fund actions that maybe could get them in trouble. We have physicians and staff and abortion providers and abortion funds here in Texas that are willing to do what it takes to get this law overturned and to be bold, but we need funds that are as bold as us. We can't be the bravest, and we don't want to be martyrs either. We're here for our community, and we need people to stand with us in bold solutions and creative solutions, not the same ones, because the same ones got us here. The same path got us here before, right? We can't keep burying our heads. We can't keep hoping that they'll make something different. They have already won in our state. They have already won. And so what I'm asking folks is to really think about, where is your line? When is it enough? And actually, when are we going to move towards bold action?
Thank you. Thank you so much, both to Rosann and Ghazaleh. Elise, I want to also ask you, since you have been doing some of this work already, what is something that you would advise to other foundations that really want to get in and get in on being bold?
I would say give your money away now. Just like get it out the door. It's not doing any good sitting in your bank account. And try, if you can, to get the process reduced to get the money out the door. I recognize that's harder at larger foundations, but to the extent you can, like, don't ask for proposals, just make general support funding available, and, you know, try to do some of this work within your foundation to really practice supporting people of color and being anti-racist. And some of that is about getting rid of your process to the extent you can. I know that's super hard. We've been doing it in our foundation. We're pretty small. It's had its challenges. It's been difficult. White supremacy culture is hard. But I just urge you all to do that and just get the money out as soon as you can. And, I'll just echo everything that's been said because it's very powerful. But the infrastructure with funds and practical support is sophisticated, is the safety net, and will be there to catch these folks, and will continue to work whether we resource them or not. But that's not an option. We have to resource them. And this is just really, really critical in this moment. And I'm not very articulate right now, but I think that's just essential. So that's what I would urge.
Great. Thank you, all three of you, again, for your powerful words and really just speaking the truth about what you are all seeing and experiencing. I know that we have been quite lively in the chat, which is great. So keep that coming. We're going to start answering some questions. So if you have any questions that you haven't asked already, feel free to drop those in the chat. A couple that I've seen come through already that haven't already been answered. The first one was, I'm wondering about giving in Texas versus giving in other states that will see an influx of patients, namely California, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, et cetera. I know both are important and necessary. So right now, I would say from NCRP's research, we don't have every state-by-state breakdown of that funding ready. We do have any existing stats that would be in our roadmap or in our fact sheet already, plus the 2% stat for Texas. But we'll certainly be watching the other neighboring states and also just states around the country very closely in terms of funding. Another question, and this will be great for all of you to answer. So when asked, my foundation still gives large grants to Planned Parenthood. Would speakers and others recommend using funds more at local levels and abortion funds while funding Planned Parenthood is great and needed? Perhaps our funds are better put to use elsewhere. And I think you all have answered that already, but does anyone else like to add something else? Rosann, Ghazaleh, or Elise?
I would love any foundation that funds, let's say, a new clinic or a new health center somewhere, to make sure that that funding also includes funding for more than one physician to work in a rural area. It is incredibly difficult to train in medicine, which is a team sport. to train as a surgeon, which is a team sport, and then this is my home, but come back, right? And be alone as the only physician working somewhere with protesters outside and no one to turn to. So wherever you're donating, it's not just a clinic, right? You can't do abortions with a clinic. You need actually investment long-term in the people that will be working there, because that's what's going to keep the clinic going, and that's what'll keep the doors open. We have many clinics with no doctors and no plans, right, for how we're going to actually see patients in them.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that, but other than, you know, it's not an either or right now, it's an all. I think the stats that have been laid out show that we're getting barely percentages of your portfolios. If you're sending 90% of your portfolio to a national space, you know, cut from there. You know, we need the resources in the states, and independent clinics in particular are doing the majority of abortion care. So I can say that for Jane's Due Process, the majority of our clients are seen in independent clinics. So we do support Planned Parenthood, but most of our clients are going to indies.
I did see Star's comments, a few in there, and I wanted to lift those up as well. I've talked about this quite a bit, but this ban is not just it also, right? This is not just an abortion ban that restricts abortion, but this is a ban that makes pregnancy in our state incredibly dangerous, even for people with wanted pregnancies. Our state already has abysmal maternal mortality rates, especially for Black people. And the communities that I take care of are going to be even more impacted for wanted and undesired pregnancies. And so birth justice is very much tied up into this issue. You know, I take care of many folks from my community that want to be pregnant, but nearly died from their last pregnancy and no longer have health insurance because of the way our state Medicaid is, and are pregnant again, right? They're not necessarily desiring abortion care, but they want to remain alive to care for their families. And we don't have that kind of infrastructure. So birth justice, the humane care of birthing people in our state is integrally tied to this. Also, immigration justice is a huge component in this as well. For our folks that live in our border communities, they actually can't leave if they're undocumented to go get abortion care anywhere. And that has been a problem, a long-standing problem in Texas. I trained in El Paso and I proudly served a binational community. And I often cared for women who were undocumented and couldn't be transferred to other hospitals for higher level of care in our state because of our immigration policies. I've cared for people whose wanted babies had to die because of our immigration policies and because they could not be transferred to Houston or to Dallas from El Paso. So these issues, immigration issues, Medicaid issues might not seem like they're connected, but they're deeply connected to abortion care in our state too.
Great, thank you. Another question, and I think, you know, the stakes are high as we've heard over and over. But unfortunately, this could be the beginning of something worse. So to that end, there was a question: are there any overall strategies for post-Roe? Obviously, there will be Mississippi's case that will be heard in Supreme Court this fall, and it will be even more terrible for deep red states, but also for all states.
I'm happy to answer that, but I also, just because there are other Texas folks on this call, if any of them have anything they want to say, I'm just going to pause and ask any of the Texas abortion folks to unmute and say anything you'd like.
If you can't unmute, raise your hand or chat me and I will unmute you.
I'll start talking, but then if someone needs to interrupt me, just go ahead. So I think, once again, yeah, post-Roe, that language that Roe v. Wade was this, thing that was holding us together in Texas. We've been living in a post-Roe state. People had to already leave Texas to get abortion care if you live in the Valley or if you live in West Texas or East Texas. So I think the same way that we got here, which was, terrible state legislatures and governors passing terrible laws, that's also one of the ways we have to get out is we have to take back our state legislators and pass policies in our states that protect and affirm abortion care. I know we're also advocating hard for the federal government. A lot of us have been on calls with the White House and with Congress this week and last week, asking them to take bold action. But the abortion stigma runs deep, right? And they're not going to throw everything they have behind us. So once again, it's not enough for the national strategy. We have to do this work in our states, and we need you to fund us so that we can change what's happening on the ground, because the majority of Texans do not believe in this abortion ban. But the money behind the abortion ban is so large and we're so under-resourced that it's incredibly hard to fight these laws.
We're in a third special session right now, each of which has introduced abortion bills, and our state ledge broke quorum and then returned, citing that democracy was so important, right? We need money behind candidates that didn't return and are willing to take bold action. We saw that we have the power to stop the gears, right? But people are worried. It's so hard to get boldly pro-abortion candidates elected here. It takes so much work. Groups like Avow on the ground here are just doing awesome jobs educating, but it's hard to be a grassroots org begging for candidates, right, to do the right thing when the money is not there.
Did any other Texas folks want to say something? Hearing none, I will move on to the next question, but feel free to keep going in the chat. The next question that I have is, I think Elise is primed to answer this one, although Rosann and Ghazaleh, please feel free to chime in. Someone is asking about any collaborative efforts of funders that folks can think of that are impactful in Texas and in beyond.
I think what you're hearing today, I would say I can't answer that question super well. I think Anna, who I mentioned from the State Infrastructure Project at STBF, is probably best positioned to help answer that question, and she is helping coordinate funders. But if you're interested, in participating in some of the funder calls, like you can ping me or NCRP, and they can connect you, I'm sure. But the funding of the funds and the tables at which folks are coming together on has been a huge part of where I think I've seen some of the coordination. There is coordination happening on the national level around the Supreme Court case for Mississippi's ban. And, similarly, I think reach out to me or others if you wanted to get plugged into that, because there's some big asks there. But I think this is related. All of this work, we're already living in post-Roe, and here, here's the opportunity to really put some money behind what we say we care about, and also, do it in a way that feels more in line with our statements and what we've been saying we care about with COVID and the movement for Black lives. I will also just echo that just my final urging is try to get rid of your process and move your money now, try to give general operating support, and yes to the birth justice conversation that make birth justice funding available in your foundation because it is tied. Later abortion is pregnancy care. All of this is pregnancy care, and there is, wanted and unwanted, but it's all on a continuum. It's not so simple. So these are important things to make sure that we tackle together. And we've been trying to do that at the foundation. So I'm making a lot of asks of everyone, but we are trying to practice all of these things at the foundation. And I recognize it's a work in progress, but we're on this journey, and I invite you to join us and reach out to me too if you would like to talk more about it and what our journey has been with this.
Well, if it's okay, I was gonna just make a comment on the security issue since we haven't talked about it. That question has come up. I want to paint a little picture of what it takes to be an abortion provider in this state. I had to create a trust to buy my home in so that people don't show up to my house to stalk me. And that means that I also have a separate mailbox that all my mail has to go to so that when I get hate mail and threatening mail, it doesn't come to my family. And, that goes on and on and on, right? That's a lot of work to work here. And our activists are, all of our funds, their staff have just been so amazing, answering the media requests, talking about the people that we serve. But they need a lot of resources in that capacity as well, in how to protect themselves. This is something that physicians who provide abortion care think about a lot since we are routinely stalked and harassed. But this is very new for many of our fund staff.
Thank you, Ghazaleh. So we're out of time for questions. I know a couple came through at the end. Thank you for addressing that, Ghazaleh. I think that was really important to lift up. If any of you would like to answer and chime in on questions that have been asked that haven't already been answered, please feel free to do so. I want to thank you all again for being on this call and taking time out of your day to talk about your experiences. And I want to thank everyone who is present on this call and sharing in the chat as well. I will hand it over back to Brandy.
I will echo what Stephanie said. I'm really thankful for the folks who joined us in this space, especially the folks on the front lines. As I know that sometimes talking about this work isn't the easy task that folks think it might be, as it comes with it's personal. A lot of folks are holding this work from a personal space. It is work that goes home with you often, as Ghazaleh has stated. And it's really hard when you're in this fight for autonomy and you don't necessarily have it. And that autonomy isn't showing up in the way that you can hold your work or even the way that your work is being funded. So I really want to thank y'all. I know that we're getting close to time. I know that Ben has shared links to some of the things that we have put out where you can find the call to actions. I really want to be clear that we're saying call to actions, but these are demands. And these are things that need to take place in order for what folks are asking to happen to take place. There is no justice without access. And sometimes the social good and the public good that folks want to fund isn't always going to be cute, and it's not always going to be legal. And it's really important to start having conversations around what it looks like to invest in this. So just a reminder of the calls and the demands that have come from the front lines: unrestricted multi-year funding, that funders are not afraid to fund radical revolutionary work, to make reporting and proposals that you're asking for these folks on the front lines to be more accessible and less of a barrier. It is really hard to complete a proposal or do these detailed grant reports when you are at the state, you are in the clinics, and you are on the ground. It's hard to be in 4 places at once. Investing in birth justice, which looks like investing in full spectrum doulas. The folks who are caring for folks in labor and delivery are also the folks that are supporting folks in abortion clinics and in their homes, because oftentimes this also looks like being bold and making statements and supporting what it looks like for self-managed abortion care. And also acknowledging that the folks that are holding this work and the folks that are having to access these things are the folks with the greatest risk. If these folks are forced into pregnancy, these are often the folks at the margins that are dying from pregnancy and childbirth. When you're looking at the people who are holding the work on the front lines, know that these are often the folks that are going to be most likely to experience harm or violence at the hands of the police or the state, which is who they are fighting in this work. And then the ongoing demands and calls that look like investing in state and local work, surrendering your conference travel and budgets that you had over the years for all the conferences and philanthropy that we did not go to, give those to abortion funds. The question came of like what it looks like for folks that are gonna have to go out of state. It can look very different if you have flight vouchers from American Airlines to give these funds. And it's doable because there are foundations that are doing it. Making sure that you're funding and supporting providers. And when we say providers, that is not just clinic owners and the doctors, that is the front desk receptionists. Those are the ultrasound techs. Those are the folks that are doing a lot of the work behind clinic doors that don't often get acknowledged and named or funded, as many of them are not able to access unemployment at this moment. And continue to amplify the work and break the silence that philanthropy has perpetuated. Silently funding this work, talking about it in closed Zooms and conference rooms is not going to remove the shame and stigma. And it's not going to make abortion any more accessible if you can't say it and if you can't talk about it. And if folks have any questions about any of these demands, I am happy to speak with you about them. I'm happy to discuss any of the content that we have put out, from our roadmaps to our COVID fact sheet, whatever the case may be. But I'm happy to continue this conversation with anyone that is interested. And I know we are at time. I'm going to pass it over to Aaron for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Brandy and Stephanie and Timmy and our amazing team leading this work at NCRP. And especially thank you to our guests and our panelists today. This was powerful. It was what we all needed to hear. And thank you to everyone who was on the call today for what you are already doing to support abortion access and for what you will do more in the future. This is so important, and NCRP is committed and with this issue for the long term. And one of the things I noticed on the call today was that it was the attendees were almost entirely women. And I'm going to reach out to a bunch of male CEOs in philanthropy and say, come on, we got to get with the program here. This issue affects everyone. This is not a women's issue. This is not a Texas issue. This affects everyone. It's an all hands on deck moment. So yeah, thanks everyone for being a part of this today.